Deep in the vast expanse of space, the massive Caxtheri flagship cut through the darkness like a blade of obsidian. Admiral Kang's scaled fingers drummed against the pristine surface of his command console, creating a rhythmic pattern that echoed his growing anticipation. The bridge hummed with the quiet efficiency of his crew, their movements precise and practiced as they maintained their positions at various stations. Through the sprawling viewport, countless stars dotted the cosmic canvas, but Kane's attention remained fixed on the holographic display before him. It showed their impressive fleet, 200 warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant suns. Each vessel was a testament to Caxtheri engineering, armed with weapons that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. "The human border lies just ahead," reported one of his bridge officers, adjusting the three-dimensional star map that floated in the center of the command deck. Red markers indicated the boundary of what intelligence suggested was human-controlled space, a territory that had remained largely mysterious to the Caxtheri Empire. Kang's inner eyelids blinked slowly as he studied the tactical display. Their fleet's path was marked in bright green, a confident arrow pointing straight into human space. The past solar cycle had been particularly successful for the Empire. 3 star systems had fallen to their might, their resources and technologies now serving the greater glory of the Caxtheri people. Sub-Admiral Yoon approached the command platform, his movements careful and measured. Unlike many of their kind who preferred to display their authority through aggressive posturing, Yoon had always maintained a quieter presence. "Supreme Commander," he spoke in hushed tones, "our long-range sensors have detected something unusual." Kang turned his elongated head toward his second-in-command, the scales along his neck shifting with the movement. "Elaborate." "Sub-Admiral." "A single vessel, sir. It appears to be patrolling the border region. Just one ship." The bridge fell silent as the crew processed this information. Kang's inner eyelids blinked again, this time in what might have been amusement. "Show me," he commanded, and the holographic display immediately zoomed in on the area in question. True to Yoon's report, a solitary vessel moved along the border in a precise pattern. Its design was unfamiliar, sleeker than anything in their database, with smooth lines that seemed to both attract and deflect attention. "The humans send a single ship to guard their territory." Kang's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Either they are fools who do not understand the threat we pose, or," he paused, considering the alternatives, "or they are arrogant beyond reason." Yoon finished the thought, his own expression carefully neutral. Kang studied the tactical display once more. Their fleet's weapons could reduce small moons to debris fields. Their shields had withstood the combined firepower of entire defensive networks. The idea that a single human vessel could pose any meaningful resistance seemed laughable. "Perhaps they simply do not know of our achievements," Kang mused aloud. 3 star systems have fallen to us in a single cycle. The Meridian cluster surrendered without firing a shot when they saw our fleet approaching. The Cygnus Defense Force lasted barely 2 days against half our current numbers. He straightened to his full height, towering over most of his bridge crew. "Signal the fleet. Attack formation Delta 7. Let us show these humans the futility of resistance. Their territory will make a fine addition to our empire." The bridge burst into activity as orders were relayed throughout the fleet. 200 ships began to shift positions, their formation changing from a traveling configuration to something more predatory. Like a school of deep space predators preparing to strike, the Caxtheri vessels spread out in a 3-dimensional pattern designed to maximize their firing solutions while minimizing their vulnerability. As Kang watched his fleet move into position, he allowed himself a moment of pride. The coordination was perfect, each ship knowing its place and purpose. Their technology was superior, their numbers overwhelming, and their victory assured. The humans would learn, as so many others had, that resistance against the Caxtheri Empire was pointless. "Time to intercept," he asked, not taking his eyes off the tactical display. 17 minutes at current speed, Supreme Commander, came the prompt response from his navigation officer. "Excellent." Kang's scaled appendages continued their rhythmic tapping on the console. Let us see what this single human ship does when it realizes the fate that awaits its people. Little did Admiral Kang know that this seemingly routine conquest was about to become the most significant and humbling encounter of his military career. The single human ship that his fleet approached with such confidence would soon teach the Kaxthari Empire a lesson they would never forget about underestimating their opponents. As the Kaxthari fleet drew closer to the solitary human vessel, Admiral Kang found himself increasingly perplexed by its unusual design. The ship defied conventional military architecture, where most warships displayed obvious weapon emplacements and armor plating. This vessel possessed an almost organic quality. Its hull flowed in graceful curves, like water frozen in motion, with no visible weapons or defensive systems. Most peculiar of all was how the ship seemed to interact with their scanning equipment. Standard sensor sweeps appeared to be absorbed rather than reflected, making detailed analysis impossible. It was as if the vessel was made of some strange material that simply consumed energy without trace. Supreme Commander called out his sensor officer. "We're receiving an identification signal from the human ship." The main screen flickered to life, displaying the vessel's designation, HMS Thunderchild. Kang's translator processed the name, but its meaning remained unclear. The choice of such a designation seemed odd for a military vessel. "Our fleet is in optimal attack position," reported Sub-Admiral Yoon from his station. "All ships report weapons locked and ready." Kang raised one scaled hand in acknowledgement. "Open communications," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of countless successful conquests. "Let us hear what these humans have to say before we add their territory to our empire." The view screen shifted, and Kang found himself face to face with a human. The alien creature that appeared before him was Captain Lee Jinwoo, a being with smooth skin instead of scales, and a face that bore an expression Kang found difficult to interpret. The human appeared to be what their intelligence classified as middle-aged, though determining human ages had always been challenging for the Kaxthari. What caught Kang's attention most was the human's eyes. They held a calm steadiness that seemed out of place given the situation. 200 warships surrounded this lone vessel, yet Captain Lee's demeanor suggested he was greeting guests at a social gathering rather than facing imminent destruction. "This is Captain Lee of the Thunderchild," the human spoke, his voice clear and measured. "You are approaching restricted space. State your intentions." The translation systems worked flawlessly, but something about the human's tone made Kang's inner eyelids twitch. There was no fear in that voice, no tremor of concern. If anything, the human captain appeared almost amused. The corner of his mouth held what Kang's cultural database identified as a slight smile. "Your arrogance is misplaced, human," Kang responded, allowing his translator to convey his words. "You face the might of the Kaxthari Empire. Submit to our authority or face immediate destruction." The threat hung in the space between them, but Captain Lee's expression didn't change. The slight smile remained, as if he were privy to some private joke that Kang couldn't understand. This reaction was so far removed from what the Admiral had experienced in previous conquests that he found himself momentarily unsettled. "Supreme Commander," Yoon spoke quietly beside him, "our sensor teams report unusual energy readings from the human vessel. They cannot determine the source or nature of these emissions." Kang's scales bristled slightly. The situation was not proceeding according to standard conquest protocols. The human's calm demeanor, the ship's mysterious design, the strange energy readings, all of it suggested there were factors at play that their intelligence had failed to identify. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order," Kang announced, both to his crew and to the human captain still watching from the screen. "Target their propulsion systems. A disabled ship may help them understand their situation more clearly." The order went out, and 20 ships on the fleet's forward edge adjusted their positions slightly, bringing their primary weapons to bear on the Thunderchild. Standard procedure called for overwhelming force. Even if the human vessel possessed impressive shields, They couldn't possibly withstand concentrated fire from so many ships. Yet Captain Lee's expression remained unchanged. If anything, his smile seemed to widen slightly, as if Kang had just confirmed something he had suspected all along. "Admiral," the human said, his voice carrying a note that might have been sympathy, "I would strongly suggest you reconsider your next action. The Thunder Child is not what you think it is, and this encounter need not end in conflict." The words were delivered with such quiet confidence that Kang felt his scales ripple with an emotion he hadn't experienced in many cycles. Uncertainty. Something about this situation felt wrong, but his pride and position demanded action. The reputation of the Caxtheri Empire could not be undermined by a single human in a single ship, no matter how unusual that ship might be. As Kang prepared to give the order to fire, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something vital. The human's calm demeanor, the ship's mysterious properties, the strange energy readings, all of it hinted at a reality that differed dramatically from what they had expected to find at the edge of human space. The next few moments would prove just how costly his failure to heed these warnings would be. The tension on the bridge of the Caxtheri flagship grew as Captain Lee's image remained steady on the main view screen. His calm demeanor had begun to affect even the most seasoned crew members, causing subtle shifts in their posture and uncertain glances between stations. "Admiral Kang," Lee spoke again, his voice carrying an unexpected note of compassion that made several of the bridge crew turn their heads. "I understand you believe your fleet's superiority is assured. The confidence comes from your previous victories, and I respect that. However, there's something you should know about humanity." The human captain paused, his eyes showing genuine concern, not for himself, but seemingly for the Caxtheri fleet that surrounded his lone vessel. This display of apparent worry for his would-be conquerors made Kang's scales ripple with irritation. "Throughout our history, humanity has faced countless challenges," Lee continued, his words measured and clear. "We've survived devastating wars that scorched our planet. We've endured plagues that threatened to wipe out our species. And yes, Admiral, we faced alien invasions before. Each time, we emerged stronger, more resilient, and better prepared for the next challenge." Sub-Admiral Yoon shifted uncomfortably beside Kang. The sensor officer reported more unusual energy readings from the Thunder Child, but still couldn't identify their source or purpose. The human vessel remained motionless, yet something about it seemed to hum with barely contained power. "I strongly advise you to reconsider your approach," Lee added, his expression now carrying a hint of sadness. "This doesn't need to end in conflict. We can establish diplomatic relations, engage in cultural exchange, perhaps even forge an alliance that benefits both our peoples." Kang felt his pride swell at these words. The human dared to speak of alliances while surrounded by the might of the Caxtheri fleet. His inner eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of growing anger that his crew recognized all too well. "Supreme Commander," Yoon spoke softly, "perhaps we should." "They speak of survival," Kang cut him off, his voice sharp with contempt, "when they should be begging for mercy." He turned to face his second-in-command directly. "Prepare main batteries. Let us show them the price of such arrogance." Yoon hesitated, his scaled hands hovering over the tactical controls. The sub-admiral had served with Kang for many cycles, had witnessed countless victories, but something about this situation felt different. The human's words carried no trace of deception or bravado, only genuine concern for what was about to unfold. "Sir," Yoon started again, "the energy readings from their vessel are irrelevant," Kang declared. "One ship, no matter how advanced, cannot stand against our fleet. Prepare main batteries. That is an order." Yoon complied, his movements careful and precise as he input the commands. Throughout the fleet, weapon systems powered up, their combined energy enough to reduce small moons to debris. 200 ships, each capable of devastating destruction, all targeting a single vessel that still showed no signs of preparing for combat. On the view screen, Captain Lee shook his head slightly. "I really wished you would have chosen differently, Admiral." Remember, what happens next is not out of malice, but necessity. We will disable your ships while minimizing casualties. That is our way." The human's words sparked murmurs among the bridge crew. Disable their ships. The concept seemed absurd. Their fleet's defensive systems were among the most advanced in known space. The idea that a single vessel could disable even one of their ships, let alone the entire fleet, was beyond consideration. Yet something in Captain Lee's tone made Kang's scales bristle. The human spoke with absolute certainty, not as someone making a threat, but as someone stating an inevitable fact. For the first time since the encounter began, a tiny seed of doubt took root in the Admiral's mind. "This is your final warning," Lee said quietly. "Power down your weapons, and let's discuss this as equals. The choice, as always, remains yours." Kang straightened to his full height, pushing aside his momentary uncertainty. He had not achieved his position by showing weakness. The glory of the Caxtheri Empire rested on his decision, and he would not be remembered as the admiral who backed down from a single human ship. "Target their primary systems," he commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Show them the futility of their resistance." As his crew moved to comply with his orders, Kang couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some crucial way, he had catastrophically misread this situation. The next few moments would prove just how right that feeling was, and how wrong he had been to ignore the human's warnings. The thunder was about to come, and with it, a lesson about humanity that the Caxtheri Empire would never forget. Space lit up with brilliant energy as the Caxtheri fleet launched their attack. Hundreds of plasma torpedoes streaked through the void, their blue-white trails creating a web of destruction aimed at the solitary human vessel. The bridge crew of the flagship watched with anticipation, expecting to see the Thunderchild reduced to scattered atoms. What happened instead would be recorded in Caxtheri military history as the moment everything changed. The Thunderchild began to move, not with the clumsy, evasive maneuvers typical of large warships, but with an impossible grace that defied physics itself. The human vessel flowed through space like water, each movement precise and deliberate. Plasma torpedoes that should have struck home passed through empty space where the ship had been moments before. "Tracking systems cannot maintain lock," reported the weapons officer, his scales pale with confusion. "The vessel's movement patterns do not match any known evasion protocols." Even more astonishing were the few shots that did manage to hit their target. Instead of detonating against shields or tearing through hull plating, the plasma torpedoes simply dissipated. It was as if the Thunderchild's hull absorbed the energy without damage, like rain falling into an ocean. "Impossible," Sub-Admiral Yoon whispered, his voice barely audible on the silent bridge. The words seemed to echo in the minds of every crew member as they watched their most powerful weapons prove completely ineffective. Through the command channel, Captain Lee's voice came through, still carrying that same note of calm compassion. "I did try to warn you." Admiral Kang's scales bristled with rage and disbelief. "Launch second wave. All ships, concentrate fire on their engineering section." His voice carried the edge of desperation that his crew had never heard before. The fleet responded, launching an even larger barrage. The space between the ships filled with deadly plasma fire, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't meant for destruction. Yet the Thunderchild's dance continued, its movements becoming even more fluid and precise. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, his voice shaking, "we're detecting energy buildups within the human vessel. Pattern unknown, but power levels are..." He trailed off, staring at his readings in disbelief. "Report," Kang demanded. "Power levels are exceeding our entire fleet's combined output," the officer finished quietly. The Thunderchild had stopped its defensive maneuvers and now hung motionless in space, seemingly unconcerned by the continuous barrage against its hull. A soft blue glow began to emanate from various points along its surface, growing steadily brighter. "All ships, evasive action." Yoon shouted, but the warning came too late. A pulse of energy, invisible until it interacted with their shift shields, expanded outward from the Thunder Child in a perfect sphere. Where it touched the Caxtheri vessels, systems began to fail. Weapons went dark. Engines sputtered and died. Shield generators fell silent. Engineering reports complete power loss. Came calls from across the bridge. Auxiliary systems not responding. Weapon systems offline. Admiral Kang watched in horror as ship after ship in his mighty fleet went dark, their lights flickering out as the energy pulse passed through them. Yet there was no destruction, no explosions, no loss of life. The Thunder Child had simply disabled them. 2/3 of the fleet reporting complete system failure, Hume announced, his voice hollow. The remainder are experiencing cascading system shutdowns. We are defenseless. On the main screen, Captain Lee's expression had not changed. Now then, he said gently, shall we discuss those diplomatic relations I mentioned earlier? The bridge fell silent, except for the occasional spark from overloaded systems. In less than 5 minutes, the most powerful fleet in the Caxtheri Empire had been reduced to powerless hulks drifting in space, without a single life lost. It was a display of power so far beyond their understanding that it bordered on the mythological. How? Kang managed to ask, his pride shattered but his curiosity overwhelming. How is this possible? Admiral, Lee responded, humanity learned long ago that the true measure of power isn't in how much destruction you can cause, but in how much you can avoid. We could have destroyed your fleet, but that's not our way. We prefer to educate rather than eliminate. As the reality of their situation sank in, Kang realized that this was not just a military defeat. It was a fundamental shift in how the Caxtheri would have to view their place in the galaxy. They had thought themselves the apex predators of space, only to discover they were children playing at war compared to humanity's capabilities. The lesson had been delivered with surgical precision, and most humbling of all, with mercy. The silence on the bridge of the Caxtheri flagship was broken only by the soft hum of failing systems and the increasingly panicked reports from the fleet. The Thunder Child hung in space before them, its hull now pulsing with waves of soft blue light that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality around it. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came when the stars behind the human vessel appeared to shift and dance, as if seen through rippling water. Then the wave began, a visible distortion in space itself that expanded outward from the Thunder Child in concentric rings. Energy distortion approaching, pattern unknown. The sensor officer called out, his scales pale with fear. It's unlike anything in our database. Admiral Kang watched in growing horror as the wave reached the first line of his ships. The moment it touched them, their lights flickered and died. The proud vessels of the Caxtheri fleet, each one a masterpiece of military engineering, simply went dark and began to drift. What manner of technology is this? Kang demanded, his voice rising as ship after ship lost power. His question echoed across the bridge. But no one had an answer to give. The wave continued its relentless advance through the fleet. When it reached the flagship, every instrument panel flickered with strange readings before going dead. Warning signals blared briefly before falling silent. Throughout the massive vessel, every system from weapons to life support experienced complete failure, leaving only emergency backup power for essential functions. Engineering reports total power loss to main systems, Sub-Admiral Yoon reported, his voice steady despite the situation. Whatever they're using, it's not just disabling our weapons, it's shutting down everything. Through the viewport, Kang could see his mighty fleet drifting helplessly in space. The ships that had conquered 3 star systems in the past cycle were now nothing more than elaborate pieces of space debris, their crews alive but powerless. On the main screen, which somehow remained functional, Captain Lee watched the scene with what appeared to be genuine regret. We developed this technology after our first contact with hostile aliens, he explained quietly. It's a gravitational manipulation field that disrupts energy patterns. Completely non-lethal, but very effective. Impossible, Kang whispered, echoing Yoon's earlier sentiment. Such technology cannot exist. The power requirements alone would be beyond your current understanding. Lee finished for him. Yes, that's rather the point we're trying to make here. Reports continued to flood in from the few ships still able to communicate. System after system was failing across the fleet. Weapons, shields, engines, everything that made their warships the terror of known space simply ceased to function. "The human vessel is moving," announced the sensor officer, working from emergency backup systems. The Thunderchild was indeed advancing slowly through the disabled fleet, its passage causing nearby ships to drift gently aside as if pushed by an invisible hand. "How many ships remain operational?" Kang asked, dreading the answer. Yoon consulted his emergency terminal. "Less than a quarter of the fleet still has power, Supreme Commander. And those numbers are dropping rapidly." The Thunderchild's approach continued, methodical and unstoppable. Each ship it passed went dark, added to the growing collection of dead vessels floating in space. Yet not a single explosion had occurred, not one hull had been breached, not a single life had been lost. "Your crew is safe," Captain Lee assured them, as if reading their thoughts. "Once we've secured the situation, we'll help restore minimal power to your life support and communication systems. Then we can begin proper diplomatic discussions." The pride of the Caxtheri Empire drifted helplessly in space, their mighty weapons silenced, their advanced shields useless, their powerful engines cold and dead. They had come expecting an easy conquest and found instead a power so far beyond their own that it made mockery of their military might. As Kang watched the last of his ships go dark, he realized that this was more than just a defeat, it was an education. The humans had not just beaten them. They had chosen to do so in a way that preserved life, while demonstrating overwhelming technological superiority. The message was clear. The galaxy was a far more complex place than the Caxtheri had imagined, and humanity was not a species to be trifled with. Through it all, the Thunderchild continued its graceful passage through the fleet, its hull still glowing with that mysterious blue light, a silent testament to powers that the Caxtheri had never dreamed possible. The conference room aboard the Thunderchild was nothing like what Kang had expected from a warship. Instead of stark military efficiency, the space held an almost comfortable atmosphere, with warm lighting and smooth surfaces that seemed to continue the vessel's external design philosophy. The room's viewport offered a clear view of the disabled Caxtheri fleet, a constant reminder of their current situation. Admiral Kang and Sub-Admiral Yoon sat at one side of a polished table, their scaled forms reflected in its surface. Across from them, Captain Lee and his first officer, Commander Park, appeared remarkably relaxed. The humans had even served them warm beverages they called tea in delicate cups that seemed too fragile for a military vessel. "Please, drink," Captain Lee encouraged, gesturing to the steaming cups before them. "It's a traditional Earth beverage. We find it helps make discussions more comfortable." Kang lifted the cup carefully in his clawed hands, his inner eyelids blinking rapidly as he analyzed the unfamiliar scent. Next to him, Yoon had already taken a tentative sip, his scales shifting in what appeared to be surprise at the pleasant taste. "Your fleet will be fully operational again within a few hours," Commander Park said, her voice carrying the same gentle tone as her captain's. "We've already begun restoring basic systems to ensure your crews remain safe and comfortable." The casual mention of their ability to restore power to 200 warships as easily as they had disabled them made Kang's scales ripple with unease. The level of technological control the humans possessed was beyond anything he had encountered in his long military career. "We've been observing your species for decades," Park continued, setting down her own cup. "We've watched your expansion, studied your technology, analyzed your social structures. The Thunderchild is what we consider a light patrol vessel, essentially a frontier guard ship." The revelation hit Kang like a physical blow. A patrol vessel? This ship that had disabled his entire fleet with apparent ease was merely a border guard. His claws tightened around the delicate cup, threatening to crack it. "If this is a patrol vessel," Yoon spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. "What do your actual warships look like?" Captain Lee and Commander Park exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "We'd prefer not to discuss our military capabilities in detail," Lee answered diplomatically. "Let's just say that we maintain what we need to ensure peace and stability in our region of space." "We prefer peaceful first contact," Park added, her expression softening. "Our history has taught us that violence should always be the last resort. But we're always prepared for alternatives, as today's demonstration showed." Kang set down his cup, his hands shaking slightly. The full weight of his miscalculation was beginning to sink in. His mighty fleet, the pride of the Caxtheri Empire, had been disabled by what the humans considered a simple patrol ship, and they had been watching his people for decades, quietly observing while possessing technology that made his empire's greatest achievements look primitive in comparison. Why? He found himself asking. Why allow us to expand? To build our fleet? To conquer other systems? If you had this power all along, why not stop us sooner? "Every species must find its own path," Lee responded thoughtfully. "We intervene only when necessary. When a civilization threatens to expand into space we've designated as protected, for instance, your empire's expansion hadn't crossed that line until today." "And now?" Yoon asked quietly. "Now we hope to establish diplomatic relations," Park answered. "Share knowledge, engage in trade, perhaps even form alliances. Humanity has learned that the galaxy is better served by cooperation than conquest." The words seemed to echo in the conference room, carrying with them the weight of a civilization far more advanced and mature than Kang had imagined possible. His pride, already wounded by their defeat, crumbled completely as he realized just how badly he had underestimated humanity. Through the viewport, he could see repair drones from the Thunderchild moving among his fleet, systematically restoring power to the disabled vessels. The humans were already making good on their promise to repair what they had disabled, demonstrating both their technological superiority and their commitment to peaceful resolution. The tea in his cup had grown cold, much like his ambitions of conquest. The galaxy, he was beginning to understand, was a far more complex place than the Caxtheri Empire had imagined. And humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were something else entirely. A teacher, perhaps, or maybe a guardian. But definitely not a prey species as they had so foolishly assumed. The Caxtheri fleet made its way slowly through space, their ships functioning but humbled. The mighty engines that once propelled them confidently through conquered systems now operated at minimal power, a limitation imposed by the humans' technology that would gradually lift over their journey home. Each vessel's database contained detailed records of their encounter with the Thunderchild, documentation that would change their empire's understanding of their place in the galaxy. In his private quarters aboard the flagship, Admiral Kang carefully composed his report to the High Council. The words didn't come easily. How does one explain to the Empire's leadership that their greatest fleet had been rendered helpless by a single human patrol ship? He had spent hours selecting each word, trying to convey the crucial lesson they had learned. His final report was simple and direct. Encountered human border patrol vessel. Advanced technology beyond our current understanding. Fleet disabled without casualties. Diplomatic contact established. His recommendation was equally clear. Avoid human space at all costs. Seek peaceful relations only. Sub-Admiral Yoon stood quietly nearby as Kang reviewed the report one final time. "The Council will not be pleased," Yoon observed softly. "The Council needs to understand," Kang replied, his scales shifting in the dim light. "What we encountered today changes everything. Our empire is not ready for contact with humanity. Not as equals, and certainly not as adversaries." Meanwhile, aboard the Thunderchild, life had returned to its normal routine. The ship resumed its patrol pattern along the border of human space, its crew efficiently performing their duties as if the encounter with a hostile fleet was nothing unusual. In his ready room, Captain Lee sat at his desk, finalizing his own report to Earth Command. The room's viewport showed the last of the Caxtheri ships disappearing into the distance, their forms growing smaller until they were indistinguishable from the stars. Another successful first contact scenario, he typed into his report. Species: Caxtheri. Technology level: mid-range spacefaring. Initial approach: hostile. Resolution: peaceful demonstration of technical superiority. Casualties: none. Diplomatic relations: pending. He paused before adding, though I wish they'd chosen diplomacy first. The door chimed softly, and Commander Park entered carrying a fresh pot of tea. She poured 2 cups with practiced grace, placing one before her captain. Thinking about our visitors, sir. Wondering how many more times we'll have to repeat this lesson, Lee replied, accepting the cup with a grateful nod. Every species seems to go through this phase, thinking they're alone in their level of advancement, believing their military power makes them invincible. They'll learn, sir, Park said, looking out at the stars. They always do. The Caxtheri showed promise. They accepted their situation with more grace than most. Lee smiled slightly, remembering similar encounters with other species over the years. Indeed, he replied, watching the stars. Indeed they do. The Thunderchild continued its patrol, its hull gleaming softly in the starlight. To any distant observer, it might have appeared to be just another ship, unremarkable and routine. But appearances, as the Caxtheri had learned, could be deceiving. In the vast darkness of space, humanity's guardian kept its vigilant watch, ready to teach the same lesson to any other civilization that might mistake humanity's preference for peace as a sign of weakness. The ship's very existence served as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful forces in the universe were the ones that chose not to display their power at all. As the last traces of the Caxtheri fleet faded from their sensors, Captain Lee made one final entry in his log. Patrol continuing as normal. All systems nominal. Peace maintained. He closed the log with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that somewhere out there, an alien empire was learning a lesson that would change their civilization forever. The stars continued their eternal dance, unchanged by the day's events, while in the depths of space, 2 civilizations moved forward on paths forever altered by their encounter. One learning the value of peace, the other maintaining it with quiet, understated power.